Imagine walking out of an interview room with tears in your eyes, feeling like every door of your future just slammed shut. Now, picture that same young woman, once rejected, once told she wasn't good enough, standing years later in the very same office, not as an applicant, but as the youngest CEO in the company's history. This isn't just a story about success, it's about resilience, courage, and never giving up. Backhand index pointing. Right before we dive deeper, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Goodness Corner for more heart-touching and inspiring stories. She still remembered the sting of that rejection like it had happened yesterday. Emily's palms had been sweaty that morning, her heart pounding as she entered the brightly lit corporate office for her very first job interview. She had rehearsed her answers 100 times, practiced her smile in the mirror, and reminded herself that she was prepared. Yet, the moment she sat in front of the panel, everything seemed to slip away. The questions felt sharper than knives, and every hesitation she made carved away at her confidence. By the time she walked out, she felt like a failure. The polite but cold rejection letter that arrived a week later sealed the feeling. They told her she wasn't the right fit, that she lacked the confidence and leadership presence required for the role. Those words burned in her mind, making her question everything she believed about herself. But sometimes rejection is not the end, it is the beginning of something greater. Emily went home that day crushed, but she didn't know that the pain of that moment was planting a seed deep within her. At first, she cried, she doubted herself, and she avoided looking at job postings for weeks. Friends who interviewed at the same company got accepted, and social media only made it worse, flashing updates of people celebrating their new jobs while she sat in silence. The world seemed to move on without her, and the weight of being left behind nearly broke her spirit. But Emily had something she herself didn't realize, a stubborn heart that refused to stay down. Instead of letting that rejection define her, she began to see it as fuel. If they thought she wasn't confident enough, she would build unshakable confidence. If they believed she wasn't a leader, she would learn to lead, even if it started with leading herself through her darkest days. She enrolled in online courses on leadership, public speaking, and business management. She spent hours at the library reading books about CEOs and entrepreneurs who had built empires from nothing. While others partied or scrolled endlessly through their phones, Emily was sketching out business ideas in notebooks, sharpening her mind, and teaching herself skills no one thought she could master. There were nights when exhaustion whispered in her ear, telling her to quit, but she had already tasted the bitterness of rejection once, and she refused to taste it again without a fight. She began working at a small local startup, not glamorous, not high-paying, but it was a battlefield where she could test everything she was learning. The CEO of that startup noticed her determination. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was the one who stayed late, who solved problems others gave up on, and who lifted her teammates when morale was low. Slowly, she grew. She started managing projects, then small teams, and before she knew it, her name was whispered with respect across the company. Still, deep inside, she hadn't forgotten the humiliation of that first rejection. It wasn't just about proving the world wrong, it was about proving to herself that she was stronger than her fears. Years passed, and Emily built a reputation that stretched beyond the small startup. Larger companies began to notice her. She was invited to conferences as a speaker, where her once shaky voice now carried with steady confidence. She no longer avoided eye contact, she commanded it. Every rejection she had faced, every failure she endured, had hardened her spirit into steel. She wasn't just an employee anymore, she was becoming a leader. And then, fate came full circle. The very company that had rejected her years ago was now struggling. Their leadership was aging, their vision was fading, and they were desperate for someone young, bold, and innovative to carry them forward. When they began searching for a new CEO, Emily's name came up, not as an applicant this time, but as a candidate recommended by industry leaders who had seen her shine. At first, she couldn't believe it. The same company that once told her she wasn't good enough now wanted her to lead them. Life had come full circle, and she had a choice to make. Hold on to the bitterness of the past or step into the future with strength. She chose strength. Walking back into that building was surreal. The walls, the halls, even the interview room, all looked the same, but she was not the same woman who had once walked out with tears in her eyes. She walked in now with her head held high, with years of experience behind her and the quiet power of someone who had been forged by rejection and risen above it. This time, she wasn't here to beg for a chance. She was here to decide whether she wanted to take the role. And when the board officially offered her the position of CEO, Emily accepted, not with arrogance, but with gratitude and determination. In that moment, she became the youngest CEO in the company's history. Her story spread like wildfire across business magazines and social media. Headlines screamed, "From rejection to CEO, Emily's unbelievable journey." Young people who had faced rejection found hope in her story, realizing that one closed door doesn't mean the end of the road. It only means the road is pushing you toward a different direction, perhaps even a greater one. But Emily didn't stop there. She used her position not just to grow the company, but to build a culture where young talent wouldn't be dismissed for lacking polish or confidence. She created mentorship programs, internships, and leadership workshops. She became the leader she once needed, the leader who looked beyond surface-level flaws and saw potential in people's hearts. And as she stood in her corner office, looking out at the skyline one evening, she thought back to that young, trembling girl who had once cried after being rejected. If only that girl could see her now. Becoming the youngest CEO in the company's history was not the ending of Emily's story, it was only the beginning of a new chapter filled with trials she had never faced before. The headlines painted her rise as glamorous and effortless, but behind the glossy photographs and magazine covers was a battlefield where her courage was tested daily. The first challenge was resistance. Many of the senior executives, men and women twice her age, looked at her with skepticism. Some whispered that she was too young, others doubted her decisions, and a few even hoped she would fail so they could step in. Emily could feel the weight of their stares in board meetings, could hear the subtle edge in their voices when they questioned her plans. She had fought so hard to reach this position, yet now it felt as if she had to fight again, this time not for a chance, but for respect. At first, it shook her confidence. She would sit alone in her office after hours, staring at the city lights, wondering if they were right. Was she truly capable of leading a company this large? The ghost of her old rejection echoed in her mind, whispering doubts. But then she reminded herself of the girl who once walked away from that very building in tears. That girl didn't give up, and neither would she. Emily decided that if she wanted respect, she wouldn't demand it, she would earn it. She began listening more than she spoke, studying every detail of the company's operations, and asking tough questions others had ignored. Slowly, her ideas began to prove themselves. A bold restructuring plan she introduced, something her critics said would never work, ended up saving the company millions. A risky product launch she championed became their highest-selling innovation in years. The same voices that once doubted her were now forced to acknowledge her vision. But Emily wasn't just determined to be a successful CEO. She wanted to change the company's culture. She remembered the sting of being rejected because she didn't fit the mold. She vowed no one in her company would ever feel that way again. She launched mentorship programs for young employees, ensuring that fresh talent was nurtured instead of dismissed. She personally took time each week to meet with interns, reminding them that their voices mattered. Her greatest moment came when a young woman approached her after a company seminar, tears in her eyes, saying, "I almost quit after my first rejection, but your story gave me hope. I'm still here because of you." That single sentence reminded Emily why she had endured every struggle, not just to rise, but to help others rise too. Of course, the journey was not perfect. There were setbacks, failed projects, and stressful nights when Emily felt overwhelmed. But with every stumble, she stood up stronger. Her story became proof that rejection doesn't define your destiny, resilience does. Years later, when people spoke of her leadership, they didn't just mention her title as the youngest CEO. They spoke of her compassion, her vision, and her refusal to let others feel small. Emily had not only changed her own life, she had changed the lives of countless others. And as she stood on stage at an international leadership summit, telling her story to thousands, her voice steady and confident, she ended with the same lesson she had lived: one rejection does not mean the end. It might just mean you are being redirected to something greater. The crowd erupted in applause, but for Emily, the real victory was knowing that somewhere in that audience, another young person who felt not enough was now ready to believe in themselves. Backhand index pointing right. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Goodness Corner, because every day, we share more stories of hope, courage, and transformation that remind us all, goodness always wins.